You won't believe the drama that unfolds when a massive airline targets one unsuspecting passenger, a proud and determined black woman named Ebony Collins. It all starts with an unassuming flight delay at John F. Kennedy International Airport, but soon it spirals into a full-blown courtroom showdown that captivates the nation. Whispers fill the gallery as lawyers argue, reputations hang in the balance, and a single piece of paper, an obscure lease agreement, threatens to bring an entire corporation crashing down. In this shocking tale of courage, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, prepare to witness how justice takes flight when the truth is finally revealed. Ebony Collins never saw it coming. She was at her kitchen table early one Saturday morning, sipping on her favorite Earl Grey tea, when a knock at her apartment door echoed through the small hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting company, let alone at 8 in the morning. In the midst of deciding whether or not to answer, the knocking continued firmer, this time impatient. She tucked her silk robe tighter around her waist, placed the tea on a chipped coaster, and went to the door. Standing there, clad in a charcoal grey suit that seemed too stiff for comfort, was a middle-aged man with a solemn expression. He introduced himself as a process server. Ebony's eyebrows shot up. She'd only read about process servers in legal thrillers and overheard stories from acquaintances who'd gone through messy divorces or business disputes. She had no illusions this could be good news. In a quivering voice, Ebony asked, "Is there a problem, sir?" He nodded curtly, handing over an official-looking envelope. "I'm sorry to disturb you so early, ma'am. I just need you to sign here." He motioned to a form attached to a clipboard. Ebony's fingers trembled slightly as she scribbled her signature. The server tore off a carbon copy, handed her the envelope, and offered a perfunctory, "Have a good day." Before she could even respond, he was gone, disappearing into the hustle of Brooklyn's early morning traffic. Her mind raced. The envelope's return address read, Pacific Meridian Airlines Legal Department, 505, Hudson Tower, Manhattan. She tore it open and scanned the first few lines. Notice of legal action. Pacific Meridian Airlines versus Ebony Monique Collins for claims of defamation, interference with business operations, and damages in the sum of $1,200,000. Ebony felt her stomach twist into a tight knot. The words seemed to blur on the page. She quickly poured more tea. Though it had grown cold, she needed to calm her nerves. She sank into her living room's worn leather couch, her heart pounding like a drumline. This couldn't be real. Why would an airline come after her of all people? It took her a moment to gather her thoughts and recall the incident from 2 months prior, a disastrous flight from JFK to Chicago O'Hare that had turned into one of the most stressful nights of her life. She'd never imagined it would lead to such a horrifying, high-stakes lawsuit. If the claim was real, she could lose everything. For a moment, her vision blurred with tears, but with a deep breath, she sat up straighter. She was Ebony Collins after all, raised by a grandmother who'd overcome Jim Crow intimidation, taught never to back down from injustice. Ebony refused to let fear consume her. The question remained, how in the world did it come to this? 2 months prior, Ebony had been brimming with excitement about a weekend trip to Chicago. She was slated to speak at a small business conference aimed at empowering women entrepreneurs. Her own startup, a boutique online fashion retailer named Collins & Co., had finally begun to gain some traction. She'd been invited to share her experience of building a following from scratch, leveraging social media, and serving a diverse customer base. So on that chilly October evening, Ebony strutted into Terminal 4 of John F. Kennedy International Airport, wearing a sleek, tailored pantsuit, her carry-on neatly packed, with conference materials. She checked in at the Pacific Meridian Airlines counter. The ticketing agent, an older gentleman with silver hair, recognized her name. He smiled broadly, congratulating her on her business success. Apparently, he'd read about her in a local magazine. Ebony's spirits soared. Everything was going perfectly. But as she proceeded through security, the flight status boards flashed an unsettling notice: Flight 2809 to Chicago O'Hare, delayed. She frowned. Her speech was early the next morning. A long delay might cause her to arrive too late. Hoping it was a minor issue, she headed toward the gate anyway. The gate area was already full of restless passengers, their faces etched with annoyance. Rumors flew: an unexpected mechanical problem, a shortage of flight attendants, even a possibility that the plane had been overbooked. The airline's staff, clad in crisp navy blue uniforms, seemed flustered. When Ebony inquired, a gate agent mentioned something vague about operational difficulties. The minutes ticked by, then hours. People paced, glancing anxiously at their phones and whispering complaints to each other. Ebony tried to remain calm, even as she called her contact at the conference, who anxiously told her, "Just get here as soon as you can. We're counting on you." She offered a reassuring, "I'll do my best," although worry gnawed at her stomach. Finally, near midnight, 5 hours late, a haggard gate agent announced boarding would begin. Ebony was relieved. She boarded with the rest of the weary passengers, found her seat, and braced for a turbulent night. But little did she know, the real drama was just beginning. As the plane taxied to the runway, it came to an abrupt halt. Ebony noticed the flight attendants conferring nervously, their eyes darting up and down the aisle. Then came an announcement, the captain's apologetic voice explaining the aircraft had encountered a software malfunction warning. They needed to return to the gate for a quick check. A chorus of groans filled the cabin, passengers rolling their eyes and shaking their heads in despair. Ebony exhaled sharply. "I can't believe this," she thought, sending out a quick apologetic text to her conference contact. But her phone's battery was nearly dead. She'd expected to be in Chicago hours ago, not stuck on the tarmac at JFK. Back at the gate, the flight attendants explained the plane might need a reboot of its navigation system. They asked everyone to remain seated. Tension thickened in the enclosed space. Babies cried, a teenage girl bickered with her mother, and a tall man in a business suit slumped against the window, cursing under his breath that he had a crucial meeting at 9 a.m. After about 30 minutes, a male flight attendant approached Ebony. With a polite but strained tone, he said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to inform you that we're going to have to deplane everyone. We need to switch aircraft." Ebony blinked, exhausted. She slowly gathered her laptop bag and coat, joining the chaotic shuffle down the aisle. At the gate, more confusion awaited. Another announcement said the crew was timing out. That is, the flight attendants and pilots had exceeded their federally mandated work hours. They'd need a replacement crew who wouldn't arrive until at least 6 a.m. By now, Ebony's frustration mingled with the crowd's collective outrage. Amid the clamor, Ebony calmly approached an airline supervisor. She politely requested accommodations, or at least a rebooking option for an earlier flight, explaining she had an important speech to deliver. The supervisor, face rigid with stress, responded brusquely that all hotels were already at capacity, and the airline was still determining next steps. Another agent abruptly told Ebony to stand back as he dealt with more urgent complaints. It was a humiliating brush-off, but Ebony bit her tongue. She simply asked for clarity, any clarity at all. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Another passenger, an older white man, shoved past Ebony, demanding immediate compensation. The supervisor seemed startled and shouted at Ebony to keep calm, as though Ebony were the aggressor. Ebony raised her eyebrows in disbelief. She'd done nothing more than ask questions, but the supervisor's shrill voice drew unwanted attention. Within minutes, whispers spread that Ebony was causing trouble, even though she'd barely raised her voice. Tensions escalated. Security was called to the gate area to manage the crowd. Ebony tried to clarify she wasn't yelling, just asking to rebook. But the narrative was already spinning out of control. She felt singled out, overshadowed by the real commotion from multiple angry passengers. By 2 a.m., the situation was chaotic enough that the airline decided to delay the flight until 8 a.m. Exhausted travelers crashed on stiff airport chairs. Ebony ended up scrunched in a corner, tears pricking her eyes from fatigue and utter frustration. She dialed the conference organizer in Chicago again, apologizing repeatedly. The call ended with an understanding but disappointed sigh on the other end. Finally, the flight did depart at 9 a.m., an astonishing 10 hours late. Ebony arrived in Chicago so behind schedule that she missed the opening of her panel. Even though the organizers graciously shifted her slot, she stood at the podium presenting in a frazzled, sleep-deprived haze. It was to her dismay far from her best performance. In the aftermath of that fiasco, Ebony had tried to file a formal complaint against Pacific Meridian Airlines for the poor customer service and the humiliating way she was treated at the gate. She recalled exchanging heated words with a man who claimed to be the gate manager, but she never imagined the airline would flip the script and sue her for allegedly causing the delay or for defamation. She'd nearly forgotten the entire ordeal until the lawsuit landed on her doorstep. Now staring at the summons in her living room, Ebony felt both terrified and indignant. The airline was twisting the events to blame her for everything. But how still reeling, Ebony placed the summons on her coffee table. She took several deep breaths and tried calling her good friend Gina Brooks, who happened to be a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm in Queens. When Gina picked up, Ebony launched into an emotional recounting of the morning's shock. After listening patiently, Gina insisted Ebony come in to see her boss attorney Randall Price as soon as possible. "Don't sign anything else. Don't speak to them. Just come in," Gina warned. That same afternoon, Ebony found herself riding the subway into Manhattan, the letter from Pacific Meridian Airlines clutched in her trembling hands. She exited at a bustling station near Times Square, navigating the crowds before entering the sleek high-rise that housed Randall Price's law firm. On the 15th floor, she was greeted by Gina, who offered Ebony a tight hug and a reassuring smile. Randall Price was a middle-aged black attorney with salt-and-pepper hair and a firm handshake. Despite the expensive suit, Ebony detected a warmth in his eyes that made her feel safe. He ushered her into a glass-walled conference room where Ebony settled into a plush leather chair. She recounted every detail of the flight delay, her memory sharpened now with the threat of $1 million lawsuit hanging over her head. Price listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Finally, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "They're claiming you caused a disturbance so severe that it delayed the flight, right? And then they tack on defamation." Ebony nodded, her voice shaking. "Yes, but that's ridiculous. The flight was already delayed for hours due to mechanical issues and crew problems. I was just asking for clarity, nothing else. If anything, they defamed me by implying I was out of control, calling security, and labeling me a troublemaker." Price sighed. "I've seen stunts like this. Sometimes big companies file lawsuits as an intimidation tactic. They figure most people will settle or back down out of fear. But you say you have no idea how they pinned the entire delay on you. Ebony shook her head vigorously. None. The plane was delayed before I even got there. All I did was ask for a rebooking or some sort of accommodation. I didn't harass anybody. But the summoning letter talks about me interfering with flight crew operations using abusive language and instigating a riot among passengers. Price raised an eyebrow, scanning through the lawsuit's allegations. We'll have to request flight logs, incident reports, passenger statements, everything. I suspect they're trying to scapegoat you for internal issues. They might have footage from the gate area if they're bold enough to try to blame you. But don't worry, we can also call on eyewitnesses. Gina chimed in. I can help gather documents. I know the right channels to get the official flight delay records and air traffic control logs. If the real reason was a mechanical glitch, that'll be documented somewhere. Price added, we can also countersue if necessary. However, Ebony, I need you to be emotionally and mentally prepared. Lawsuits like this can get ugly. They'll dig into your history, try to find anything they can use to discredit you. Are you ready for that? A lump caught in Ebony's throat. She thought about her young startup, her reputation as an entrepreneur all the time, an effort it took to establish her brand's integrity. One smear campaign could unravel her life's work, but she also felt a surge of defiance. She couldn't let them bully her. In a steady voice, she replied, I'm ready. I'll fight because I know the truth. Price nodded approvingly. Good. First things first, we'll respond to their complaint and demand to see their evidence. If they're bluffing or if it's all smoke and mirrors, it won't stand in court. Let's see what they're hiding. Those words gave Ebony a flicker of hope. She exhaled, slowly glancing at Gina, who offered a supportive smile. Perhaps she wasn't alone in this, after all. Over the next week, Ebony devoted every spare moment to working with Randall Price and Gina. They filed a formal response to the lawsuit, denying all allegations and requesting a comprehensive set of documents, maintenance logs, crew rosters, gate footage, and any recorded announcements from that night. Meanwhile, Ebony launched her own investigation. She posted a discreet message on her social media, asking if any of her followers had been on Pacific Meridian Flight 22809 that fateful night. Within hours, her inbox was flooded with messages from fellow passengers who recounted the mechanical issues, the inattentive airline staff, and the general chaos. Many of them were outraged to learn that Ebony had been sued, as they felt the airline's meltdown had nothing to do with her. A few passengers attached cell phone videos of the fiasco at the gate. Although the clips were short, Ebony could be seen standing calmly, arms folded, waiting for clarification. In the background, it was the airline staff who looked frantic. The large man who had been shouting was nowhere near Ebony. He was yelling at a completely different staffer. At no point was Ebony screaming or causing trouble. One video even caught the snippet where a supervisor told Ebony to stand back when she was already standing quietly by a pillar. Randall Price was thrilled to obtain such footage. This is gold, he said, leaning over Gina's shoulder as they watched the clips in the law firm's conference room. It clearly shows Ebony wasn't the instigator. And once we sync these timestamps with official flight logs, we'll prove the delay was due to mechanical or crew issues. This is looking better and better for us. Yet Ebony couldn't shake the feeling that there was a deeper reason behind the airline's bizarre legal attack. It seemed improbable that Pacific Meridian, one of the major carriers in the United States, would go after a single passenger just to scapegoat a delay. Plenty of flights face mechanical troubles. They don't go around suing random travelers to cover their tracks. Something else was at play. Her suspicions gained ground when Gina discovered that the specific aircraft used for Flight 22809 was not actually owned by Pacific Meridian Airlines. The plane was leased from a lesser-known company called Atlas Aero Leasing. It's fairly common for airlines to lease planes, especially if they don't want to invest in outright purchases, Gina explained. But here's something interesting. The plane was flagged by the FAA several times in the past year for maintenance issues. Maybe they kept it hush-hush, and they're worried about liability. Price's eyes lit up. If they were behind on payments, or if the maintenance logs were incomplete, they might have taken the risk of operating a plane that needed serious repairs. Then, when the flight got delayed and turned into a fiasco, they needed someone to pin it on. If Ebony's complaint had gone public, it could have shed light on a pattern of negligence. This lawsuit might be a preemptive strike to keep Ebony quiet. Ebony listened intently, anger simmering in her veins. So they tried to bully me into silence. Price nodded. Very likely. But we need hard evidence. Let's subpoena the lease agreement between Pacific Meridian and Atlas Aero. If we find that they were using a plane that wasn't up to standard or had some contractual breach, that could blow their case wide open. And so Ebony and her legal team took the first steps toward unveiling the truth. Little did she know that the lease agreement itself would become a time bomb set to explode in the middle of a courtroom where the entire world would see Pacific Meridian's shocking secrets laid bare. As soon as Ebony's legal team fired off subpoenas and demanded internal documentation, Pacific Meridian's high-powered lawyers responded with what could only be described as a scorched earth strategy. They bombarded Ebony with discovery requests of their own, demanding years of her personal records, everything from text messages to financial statements, trying to paint Ebony as an unstable individual who might have had a motive to disrupt the flight. They're trying to bury us in paperwork and dig up anything that looks suspicious, Price explained grimly during a late-night phone call with Ebony. Don't panic. Just give them what they want, if it's relevant. We have nothing to hide, and we don't want them complaining later that we withheld documents. Ebony spent hours sorting through personal files, emails, and statements, feeling both violated and furious. She found it sickening that an international corporation would stoop to comb through her life in an attempt to discredit her. Some nights she cried herself to sleep, the stress mounting. Her startup work began to suffer, and she had to rely heavily on her small team to keep things afloat. Yet she refused to back down. Her resolve only hardened. At times, Ebony's confidence wavered. Her legal fees were piling up, overshadowing her business gains. But a glimmer of hope arrived when Price's office received certain flight records and partial documentation about the lease arrangement with Atlas Aero. It revealed a history of repeated mechanical issues on that particular plane. More importantly, it hinted there was an ongoing dispute between Pacific Meridian Airlines and Atlas Aero about the maintenance responsibilities. Certain documents were heavily redacted, but Price suspected that under those black lines lay the crucial evidence they needed. Gina, ever resourceful, used her connections to track down a technician who used to work on that plane. Over a clandestine phone call, the technician suggested that Pacific Meridian had been warned the plane's software system was prone to glitches and needed a costly overhaul. Instead, the airline had insisted on a quick patch, likely to avoid paying a hefty bill to the leasing company. "This is a ticking time bomb," the technician reportedly said. "I left because I couldn't stand the corner cutting. One of these days, that plane's going to have a serious failure mid-flight. It's just not safe." When Ebony heard that, her blood ran cold. She felt a burst of horror, imagining how her flight might have ended if the plane had taken off with an unaddressed software malfunction. She also felt renewed determination she would unmask the airline's negligence. They had essentially played roulette with the lives of hundreds of passengers, and now they were trying to pin the blame on her for daring to question them. In the midst of all this turmoil, Ebony found herself increasingly isolated. Some of her friends were supportive, but they couldn't fathom the depth of stress she carried. Her mother, Caroline, called from Georgia almost daily, worried sick. "I'm coming up there if you need me," she offered. Ebony always insisted she could handle it, not wanting to burden her mother with legal complexities. Yet one evening, when Ebony was at her wit's end, she dialed her mother in tears. Caroline listened patiently, then gently reminded Ebony of the family's legacy. "Your grandmother marched on those segregated streets, B. She faced down threats and overcame. You carry that same strength. Don't you let those big corporations scare you." Recalling her grandmother's stories, the humiliations, the dog attacks, the unwavering faith in justice, Ebony found new resolve. She also confided in her father, who still lived in Brooklyn. A retired postal worker, he was an avid follower of the news and had a deep distrust of large corporations. He told Ebony he admired her bravery and that she was doing something not just for herself, but for every passenger who'd ever been mistreated or ignored. Still, Ebony's father was worried about how the lawsuit might tarnish her name. She understood the risks, but Ebony clung to the principle that truth must prevail. She was forging ahead, come what may. Nearly 6 months after Ebony received that summons, the case finally moved toward trial. Both sides had engaged in intense discovery battles. Pacific Meridian's attorneys kept attempting to get Ebony's case thrown out on technicalities, claiming she had no valid complaint, that her presence had indeed caused the disturbance, that her social media posts were maliciously targeting the airline. Every motion was countered by Randall Price with methodical precision. The judge assigned to the case, the Honorable Letitia Warren, was known for her no-nonsense approach in the Manhattan Civil Court. She refused to be swayed by the airline's fancy legal maneuvers, insisting that the claims and counterclaims would be decided at a jury trial. And so the date was set. Ebony Collins versus Pacific Meridian Airlines would open before a packed courtroom in downtown Manhattan. As the weeks ticked by, Ebony tried to maintain her composure, even as nightmares of losing haunted her. She knew she had truth on her side, but she also recognized the unpredictability of a court battle. An unscrupulous corporation might manipulate facts, or a single charismatic argument from the opposition might sway the jury. At times, Ebony stepped back from the stress by focusing on her business. She launched a new clothing line, inspired by the empowerment of women who faced obstacles in the professional world. Unexpectedly, the story of her legal battle trickled out, garnering her brand an influx of supportive customers who admired her courage. While Ebony never wanted to be known primarily as the woman who got sued by an airline, she embraced the waves of solidarity that came her way. Finally, the morning of the trial arrived, gray clouds looming over the city, as if reflecting Ebony's mood. She dressed in a modest black blazer and skirt, her hair neatly braided. When she reached the courthouse, cameras flashed. Journalists had gotten wind of the unusual David versus Goliath case. Ebony did her best to maintain a calm expression, stepping through the throng. Gina was there, steady as ever, handing Ebony a latte and a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Randall Price joined them, carrying an imposing briefcase stuffed with files. Together, they ascended to the courtroom where Ebony's fate would soon be decided. The courtroom was packed. On the left sat Ebony and her legal team, trying to maintain composure. On the right was a small army of Pacific Meridian's lawyers, men and women in pristine suits, some rummaging through reams of paperwork, others tapping at laptops. The airline's lead attorney, Marcus Bowden, was a tall, imposing figure, known for his ruthless cross-examinations. Judge Warren entered with a stern demeanor and wasted no time laying out the parameters for the trial. She explained the jury's role and cautioned the attorneys against theatrics. With the legal formalities concluded, each side presented its opening statements. Bowden began with a flourish painting Ebony as a disgruntled passenger who stirred unrest at the gate, incited other travelers to revolt against the airline's staff, and defamed Pacific Meridian's reputation through social media interviews and complaints. He hammered home the airline's alleged losses, rerouting cost refunds, compensation to other travelers, and the intangible blow to the company's public image. Ebony's blood boiled hearing the distorted narrative, but she steadied herself. It was Price's turn. He addressed the jury with measured confidence, describing Ebony as a hard-working entrepreneur whose only crime was asking for clarification during a night of mechanical delays. He stressed the airline's repeated mechanical failures and the suspicious attempts to hide it. He also mentioned that Ebony had video evidence from multiple passengers showing she was calm throughout the ordeal. Price concluded by describing the airline's lawsuit as retaliatory, a blatant attempt to silence a passenger who dared to file a complaint. When opening statements concluded, Judge Warren indicated that the plaintiff's Pacific Meridian would present their witnesses first. One by one, flight attendants and gate staff took the stand recounting the night's chaos. Some admitted the flight was delayed for mechanical reasons, but they insisted Ebony's aggressive attitude worsened an already tense situation. Their testimonies, however, often contradicted each other. One gate attendant claimed Ebony screamed about suing the airline, but under Price's cross-examination, she admitted it was too noisy to be certain who was shouting. Another insisted Ebony shoved a staff member, yet no official record or passenger statement confirmed such an incident. Tensions built. Bowden tried to introduce second-hand accounts that Ebony posted inflammatory rhetoric on social media. Price objected, demanding proof. The judge sustained the objection effectively, barring gossip-based testimony. Bit by bit, Pacific Meridian's case showed cracks. Their portrayal of Ebony as a menace seemed unsubstantiated. Halfway through the trial, Bowden shocked the court by calling an unexpected witness, Jerome Hill, a man Ebony recognized from the chaotic gate scene. He took the stand, claiming Ebony had led the chanting of angry passengers, fueling aggression toward the airline staff. He even alleged Ebony hurled insults. This woman said she'd see them in Court Hill, declared, voice trembling in manufactured outrage. She said she'd make them pay for the delays. Price leaned over to Ebony, whispering, "Do you even know this man?" Ebony shook her head. She remembered him faintly as part of the crowd, but had never interacted with him. During cross-examination, Price questioned Hill's motives. "Mr. Hill, are you in any way affiliated with Pacific Meridian Airlines?" Hill visibly tensed. "No," he said too quickly, eyes darting. "Have you ever worked for them or had a contract with them?" Price pressed. Hill swallowed hard. No, not exactly." Price's eyes narrowed. He revealed a piece of paper. "According to corporate records, you applied for a gate agent position at Pacific Meridian last year. Were you hired?" Hill stammered. Yes, but it was only seasonal. It was a short contract." Price nodded, letting the jury absorb the revelation. "So you worked for the airline. Did you have any hope of future employment with them?" Hill's face reddened. Maybe he mumbled. "And did you receive any compensation for your testimony here today?" Price asked. Bowden immediately objected, but the judge allowed Price to continue. Hill fumbled, eventually admitting he was promised reimbursement for travel and a small stipend for missed work. Price hammered home the possibility that the airline might have encouraged Hill to provide damaging testimony in exchange for a chance at re-employment or monetary compensation. By the time Hill left the stand, the credibility of his testimony was thoroughly undermined. Ebony's heart pounded with relief. She felt the tide turning. With Pacific Meridian's witnesses thoroughly examined, it was now time for Ebony's side to present her defense. One by one, passengers from Flight 2809 testified. Their accounts aligned closely with Ebony's recollection. The plane was already delayed. Ebony was calm, and the real confrontation came from a few angry passengers who confronted airline staff. Footage from cell phones was shown to the jury, clearly revealing Ebony standing in the background, not even speaking in some clips. The jury watched their expressions, hinting they found Ebony's side credible. Ebony herself took the stand. Though nervous, she spoke with clarity about the ordeal. She recounted politely, asking for rebooking information, the condescending tone from the gate staff, the lack of any official explanation for the mechanical delay. She explained how the lawsuit blindsided her and how she believed the airline was scapegoating her. Bowden tried to rattle her with aggressive questions about her social media posts, but Ebony calmly answered each one, pointing out that her posts never defamed the airline. She merely expressed frustration over the mismanagement and posted her intention to file a complaint. The highlight of the defense came when Randall Price introduced an expert witness, an aircraft maintenance professional familiar with that specific plane's history. He testified about repeated software malfunctions and how the plane should have been grounded pending major repairs. Operating that aircraft on October 15th, he concluded, was irresponsible from a maintenance standpoint. He pointed to logs that indicated a navigation CPU overhaul was overdue and how a series of lesser fixes had been used instead. The jury seemed fascinated as it placed the blame for the delay squarely on the airline's negligence. Pacific Meridian's attorneys attempted to discredit him, but he had the credentials and documentation to back up every statement. Then came the bombshell. Gina, who had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, finally managed to get the unredacted sections of the lease agreement between Pacific Meridian Airlines and Atlas Aero. She handed the documents to Price with a triumphant grin. The next day in court, Price informed Judge Warren they had crucial new evidence. The tension was palpable as Price addressed the court. "Your Honor, we have just obtained the full lease agreement for the aircraft used in Flight 2809. We believe it contains pertinent information about who was responsible for the plane's maintenance and operational readiness, which directly pertains to the cause of the delay." Bowden scrambled, objecting that the documents were introduced too late, but Judge Warren allowed it, stating the defense had only recently acquired them and they were highly relevant. Price called to the stand a representative from Atlas Aero's legal department, a woman named Patricia Cho. She explained the terms of the lease. According to the agreement, Pacific Meridian Airlines is solely responsible for all routine maintenance compliance with FAA directives and ensuring the aircraft remains in airworthy condition. Atlas Aero's role is limited to providing the aircraft in a safe condition at the start of the lease term. Price directed the jury's attention to a clause that read, "The lessee Pacific Meridian Airlines assumes full responsibility for timely mechanical and software updates in adherence to FAA and manufacturer's guidelines." Ms. Cho went on, "We repeatedly notified Pacific Meridian that the plane had an unresolved software anomaly that required a major update. They declined to schedule the update, citing costs and scheduling conflicts. They were aware of the risk." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Pacific Meridian's attorneys squirmed in their seats. Price hammered the point. So the plane that night wasn't just randomly delayed. The airline knew it had a risky, outdated software system. Yet they chose to operate the flight anyway, correct? Ms. Cho nodded grimly. That's correct. Like a stone dropping into a still pond, the realization rippled through everyone in the courtroom. Pacific Meridian had misled not only Ebony, but also the other passengers, the FAA, and potentially the general public, by running a plane that needed critical fixes. The airline's entire lawsuit against Ebony now looked like a smokescreen to bury their own negligence. Marcus Bowden attempted to salvage the situation by cross-examining Ms. Cho, insinuating that Atlas Aero had not responded swiftly enough when the software issues were first flagged. But Ms. Cho calmly produced emails showing repeated attempts to schedule the overhaul, all turned down by Pacific Meridian's operations manager. She also revealed that the airline was behind on its lease payments, creating added tension between the two companies. The implication was clear. A cost-saving measure might have driven the airline to push flights with a plane that wasn't properly maintained, gambling with passengers' safety, and eventually scapegoating Ebony when the flight inevitably faced operational failures. When Price asked Ms. Cho if Ebony Collins had any role in causing the flight's delay, she shook her head. None whatsoever. The plane was not cleared to fly due to software complications. Passengers have no control over that. In that moment, Ebony felt vindicated, her body flooded with relief. The truth was out in the open, not just as rumor, but as irrefutable evidence laid bare in front of the judge and jury. The moment Ms. Cho's testimony concluded, an electrifying hush fell over the courtroom. Gasps echoed around the gallery, and Ebony could hear hushed commentary. They tried to pin it all on her. That's outrageous. Even some members of Pacific Meridian's legal team exchanged alarmed looks. They hadn't expected the unredacted lease agreement to surface or to be so damning. Judge Warren calmly called for order, her gavel striking once, echoing off the wooden panels. She then asked Price if he had any more witnesses. Price glanced at Ebony, who shook her head. They had presented more than enough. Pacific Meridian's side seemed stunned, but Bowden announced they had no further rebuttal witnesses available. A sense of finality settled in. The judge adjourned the session for the day, instructing the jurors to return for closing arguments and deliberations. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed Ebony. Microphones were thrust in her face. Reporters shouting, "Ms. Collins, is it true? The airline used you as a scapegoat?" Ebony, still in shock, managed to answer politely, "All I ever wanted was the truth. Now we have it." When the trial resumed, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Bowden did his best to spin the evidence, claiming that regardless of mechanical issues, Ebony had escalated tensions, damaging the airline's reputation. But it was a feeble argument at this stage. Most of the jury looked unconvinced. Price delivered a concise closing statement, reiterating that Ebony was a victim of wrongful accusations and that Pacific Meridian's primary motive was to mask their negligence and minimize their own liability. He skillfully tied in the lease agreement's revelations, the mechanical records, and the video evidence that showed Ebony's calm demeanor. He ended on a note of moral righteousness. If we allow corporations to bully innocent citizens to hide their wrongdoing, we fail not only Ebony Collins, but ourselves as a just society. Judge Warren gave the jury their instructions, explaining how they should weigh evidence for defamation, interference with business operations, and Ebony's counterclaims of malicious prosecution and emotional distress. The tension soared as the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Ebony waited in the courthouse cafeteria alongside Gina and Price. She sipped a lukewarm cup of coffee, but tasted nothing. Hours felt like days. She tried to distract herself by reading supportive messages from her online followers, many of whom had watched the trial coverage on local news channels or read about it in newspapers. Strangers from all over the country sent messages of encouragement, some sharing their own horror stories with Airlines. At one point, Ebony's mother called to pray with her, offering words of faith and resilience. Ebony blinked back tears, thankful for the unwavering support from her family and the glimmer of solidarity among everyday people. Finally, a bailiff approached, announcing the jury had reached a verdict. Ebony's chest tightened. She walked back into the courtroom on trembling legs, her heart pounding so loudly she could scarcely hear anything else. The jury filed in solemnly. An older woman with kind eyes served as the foreperson. She rose, holding the slip of paper that contained the fate of both parties. Judge Warren asked, "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the woman replied, voice steady. In measured tones, the foreperson read the findings. On Pacific Meridian's claim of defamation, the jury found in favor of Ebony Collins, meaning no defamation was proven. On the airline's claim of interference with business operations, the jury also found in favor of Ebony Collins, no interference was proven, as the cause was mechanical issues known to the airline. Regarding Pacific Meridian's request for $1,200,000 in damages, the jury awarded them nothing. Turned on Ebony Collins' counterclaims for malicious prosecution, the jury found Pacific Meridian liable, concluding the lawsuit was initiated without probable cause and primarily to intimidate Ebony. And on Ebony's claim of emotional distress, the jury awarded Ebony $750,000 in compensatory damages. Additionally, the jury decided on $2,000 in punitive damages, citing the airline's reckless disregard for truth and safety. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Ebony clasped a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. She stared at her attorney in disbelief. Randall Price reached over, whispering, "You did it. You won." Judge Warren thanked the jury and dismissed them. Then, with a sharp rap of her gavel, she brought the trial to a close. Court adjourned. The media chaos erupted outside instantly, but Ebony was too stunned by relief, gratitude, and vindication to even speak. The story exploded in the media. David beats Goliath. Airline loses $3 million verdict to single passenger. Read a headline on the New York Daily Post. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #Justice for Ebony Collins and Airline Scandal. Pacific Meridian's stocks plunged amidst the negative publicity and revelations about their maintenance lapses. Their CEO, under pressure from the board, issued a statement apologizing for unfortunate events and mistakes made by our legal team. Rumors swirled that heads would roll within the airline's top management. Ebony's personal life changed overnight. She became a reluctant celebrity, with news outlets clamoring for interviews. She kept her comments measured. "I'm thankful justice was served," she repeated, always crediting her legal team, the supportive passengers, and the unwavering faith she found in family and friends. She declined offers from sensational talk shows that wanted to dramatize the story even further. Ebony didn't want to be defined by this trial. She wanted to focus on her business and perhaps use her newfound platform to advocate for passenger rights and airline accountability. Shortly after the verdict, Ebony hosted a dinner for her closest supporters at a local Brooklyn restaurant. Gina Randall, Price Ebony's mother, father, and a few old friends gathered to celebrate. Through tears of joy, Ebony thanked everyone. Price raised a glass, toasting Ebony's courage and the truth that prevailed. Laughter and camaraderie filled the air as they savored this hard-won victory. In the days that followed, Ebony began meeting with philanthropic advisors. While she was thrilled by the financial award, she didn't want it all to sit in her bank account. She planned to pay her legal fees, invest in her startup, and then use a portion to fund scholarships for underprivileged youth interested in entrepreneurship. My grandma always said, "When you climb, don't pull the ladder up behind you. Leave it there for someone else." "That's what I intend to do," she told a local reporter. For Pacific Meridian Airlines, the fallout was far from over. Regulators launched a deeper investigation into their maintenance procedures. The FAA slapped them with hefty fines citing repeated negligence in keeping leased planes up to code. Meanwhile, the airline faced a class action lawsuit from passengers who discovered their flights had also been operated under questionable conditions. Business partners distanced themselves. Corporate travel managers removed Pacific Meridian from their preferred airlines list, not wanting to be associated with a company that had shown such blatant disregard for safety and ethics. The board of directors fired multiple executives, including the vice president of operations, responsible for ignoring the software fix. The CEO resigned shortly afterward, citing personal reasons. The scandal seemed to spiral. Every new revelation damaged the airline's reputation further, from missed safety audits to hush money allegedly offered to certain employees. The largest blow came when major corporate clients cancelled their contracts. Within a year of Ebony Collins's landmark trial victory, Pacific Meridian Airlines had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, its brand in tatters. Observers called it a textbook case of corporate hubris meets karmic justice. They noted that had the airline admitted fault from the beginning, offered Ebony a genuine apology, and addressed safety issues, they might have salvaged their name. Instead, they chose to double down by attacking an innocent passenger, which only accelerated their downfall. Meanwhile, Ebony continued to grow her boutique fashion brand. The trial's publicity unexpectedly boosted Collins & Company. Ebony expanded her product line to include a men's division and an eco-conscious clothing collection, forging partnerships with sustainable fabric suppliers. She balanced business strategies with philanthropic endeavors, launching the Collins Rising Star Fund, which offered grants and mentoring programs to promising entrepreneurs from underserved backgrounds. She also found herself drawn to advocacy work. Consumer rights groups invited her to speak about corporate accountability. She appeared on panels addressing racial bias in customer service industries, drawing from her experience at the gate when she'd been singled out and treated with undue hostility. Ebony, though not seeking the limelight, recognized that her story held power to inspire changes in how companies treat customers, especially customers of color. 1 year after the trial, Ebony stood at the University of New York's auditorium, addressing a crowd of budding business students. She told them how a single delayed flight propelled her into a battle she never asked for, but one she was determined to win. She emphasized resilience, the importance of meticulous evidence gathering, and faith in the legal system despite its flaws. "Don't ever let anyone bully you out of your truth," she said, her voice resonating across the silent hall. "If I had settled or let fear stop me, we'd never have exposed the airline's negligence. Always stand up for yourself. That's how we make this world a little more just." The crowd gave a standing ovation. It was a surreal moment, but Ebony accepted it with humility, recalling the countless nights she'd cried, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Now she knew her grandmother's spirit lived on in her determination. Justice was possible when courage met opportunity. Throughout this journey, Ebony discovered a profound lesson about standing up for one's rights in the face of injustice. Initially, she thought it was about clearing her name and protecting her reputation, and that was undeniably crucial. But as the ordeal grew more complex, Ebony recognized she was fighting for something bigger, the principle that corporations, no matter how big or powerful, must be held accountable. She also navigated layers of intersectionality. As a black woman, Ebony had faced subtle biases at the gate, in the airline's portrayal of her as an aggressor, and in the way they used stereotypes to frame their lawsuit. Yet she'd come out not only victorious, but also as a beacon for others who felt voiceless. The times were changing, and Ebony's stand became part of a broader conversation about racial justice, consumer rights, and the dignity owed to every person who steps onto an airplane. Yet Ebony always insisted she was not a hero, just someone who refused to be intimidated. She stressed the roots of community family and dedicated legal allies in her victory. "I didn't win this alone," she often said, praising the everyday citizens who sent her videos, wrote testimonies, and stood beside her in solidarity. Determined to reclaim her original purpose, Ebony returned to Chicago a year after the ordeal. This time, she arrived on time and stress-free. The same business conference that once welcomed her now honored her as a keynote speaker. Standing before hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs, she shared how a delayed flight turned into a life-altering battle and a victory. Her story resonated deeply. Afterward, young women lined up to thank her, one tearfully admitting, "You inspired me not to give up." In that moment, Ebony realized her journey had come full circle, not as a victim, but as a vessel of hope. Weeks after the trial, Ebony received an email from the U.S. Department of Transportation inviting her to a roundtable in Washington, D.C. The topic, airline transparency and passenger safety. Surprised but honored, Ebony accepted. At the meeting, she shared her experience, stressing the need for stricter oversight of leased aircraft and clearer communication with travelers. Her words struck a chord. A committee was formed to explore new legislation. Though she knew policy change would be slow, Ebony left feeling proud. Her fight had sparked real conversations in rooms of power. Her voice was no longer reactive, it was shaping the future. With the storm behind her, Ebony took time to reflect. She'd emerged stronger, more confident, assertive, and deeply empathetic. Realizing many couldn't afford quality legal help, she partnered with a non-profit to launch a legal defense fund, seeding it with part of her settlement. She also reconnected with old friends, hosting cozy dinners filled with soul food and stories. These quiet moments reminded her of the community that had carried her through. Ebony no longer saw herself as just a survivor of corporate injustice. She saw herself as a bridge helping others find strength in their own storms. One weekend, at a Brooklyn farmer's market, Ebony spotted a familiar face, Maria, a former gate agent from that chaotic night at JFK. No longer with the airline, Maria approached with tearful remorse. "We were told to stay silent about the plane's issues," she admitted. Ebony listened quietly, sensing genuine regret. Their conversation was long and sincere. "We all could have done things differently," Ebony said softly before parting. In that moment, she realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about releasing bitterness. Even in systems of silence, there were people trying to find their voice. Ebony chose to let grace lead. Ebony's legal triumph soon attracted documentary interest. Initially hesitant, she agreed to participate on the condition that the film highlights systemic issues, not just her story. Traveling across the country, she met others who'd battled corporate intimidation, single parents, farmers, small business owners. Their shared struggles bonded them, revealing a common thread of resilience. Through these encounters, Ebony gained deeper perspective. Her fight was part of something much larger. By the end of filming, she was emotionally exhausted, but deeply inspired. Her victory wasn't just personal, it became a symbol of hope for countless others still fighting to be heard. With the trial behind her, Ebony turned inward, reflecting on the whirlwind she had survived. Though anger toward Pacific Meridian lingered, she chose forgiveness, not for the corporation, but for the individuals caught in its machinery. In a heartfelt open letter, published nationally, she urged systemic change while showing grace to employees who had quietly expressed remorse. "We must dismantle toxic cultures from the top down," she wrote, "but we can still extend compassion to those swept up in them." The letter resonated widely, solidifying Ebony's image not only as a fighter for justice, but also a voice for healing. 2 years after the trial, Ebony stood once more in JFK Airport, this time en route to Paris, for a global ethics conference. As she moved through the terminal, memories of that fateful night flickered briefly, but they no longer held power. Boarding a modern aircraft from a reputable airline, Ebony felt calm, even hopeful. The flight attendants smiled warmly. Everything was seamless. Gazing out the window, as the plane ascended, she whispered a quiet thanks for truth, for growth, and for second chances. This flight symbolized not just travel, but a full-circle moment of healing and triumph. Ebony Collins' victory didn't just end in the courtroom. It sparked lasting change. The FAA implemented stricter oversight on leased aircraft, mandating airlines disclose critical mechanical updates publicly. Across the country, passengers began citing her case to challenge airline negligence, empowered by her courage. Ebony's brand Collins & Co. flourished globally. But more than fashion, her name became synonymous with integrity and resilience. She expanded her philanthropy funding, business workshops, legal aid programs, and diversity initiatives. At every speaking event, she reminded audiences how a single document, the lease agreement, shifted the balance of power. Truth, she often said, is the most powerful weapon we have. Though fame occasionally followed her, Ebony stayed grounded, hosting family dinners, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and sharing laughter with old friends. Her courtroom battle became the bedrock of her legacy, not for the drama, but for the justice it brought. Today, Ebony's story stands as a beacon for those silenced by systems larger than themselves. She proved that when you stand firm in truth, even the most intimidating giants can fall. And in doing so, she didn't just win a case, she changed the skies for all who would fly after her. Thank you for joining me on this unforgettable journey of twists, turns, and ultimate triumph. From the moment Ebony Collins was unjustly sued by Pacific Meridian Airlines to the shocking reveal of their secret lease agreement in a packed courtroom, we witnessed how one determined individual can challenge a powerful corporation and emerge victorious. If Ebony's story taught us anything, it's that truth shines brightest when we refuse to be silenced, and courage backed by solid evidence can topple even the mightiest opponent. If you enjoyed this powerful narrative and believe in spreading stories that inspire justice and perseverance, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps bring more incredible true-to-life tales that remind us never to underestimate the power of one voice, especially when that voice refuses to be silenced. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking content, and thank you for watching.